Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Ancient Warfare Answers. I'm Murray Dahm, the assistant editor of Ancient Warfare magazine, and with me is Jasper Ortage, the editor of Ancient Warfare magazine. This is episode 127. We've just been reliably informed.
So we jumped a bit. I think it's continuous numbering. We cheated, but it was easier.
Sounds good, though. 127. We've been on air that long. Anyway, I've got the first question for Jasper. We're both going to answer it because we've both got things to say. The question is, last stands on the battlefield, are they real or are they a literary device?
Well, Murray, it's probably one of those things where you go, probably both. I'm sure some of them happened, but I think we should think about it first a little bit. Like, what is a last stand? What does it mean? Is it a, I suppose in the narrow sense, it's going to be a determined resistance until that continues until all the defenders have been killed or incapacitated, at least. In which case, you think of Thermopylae and the Sacred Band at Chaeronea. But I was thinking, could we talk about the Battle of the Champions, where supposedly two groups of 300 men fought each other to death until one was left standing. Is that a last stand, or is the last stand when there's just a general left who's maybe fled with some of his last compatriots, last comrades, and they fight to death, or they don't, and they're actually overwhelmed, and it's just a general who dies, and the rest sort of forgotten about? And what about Masada? Is that a last stand, or because they stick it out really to the end until they decide that they can't stop the Romans anymore, and then they kill themselves? We also have to wonder if it's something to do with the expectation of not surviving a battle if you're, you need to die honorably if you're not going to win the battle. In which case we often see generals killing themselves or letting themselves be killed by a slave or a trusted comrade before the enemy does it for them. So I suppose there is a degree of literary device in that respect. And of course, the biggest example is Thermopylae, that is held up as an example of a heroic last stand. But it could equally be interpreted as, well, the Spartans didn't really commit to the defense of Greece. They sent a fairly small army to make a stand, lost horribly, and the Persians just marched on. And then afterward, they made it into a big heroic defeat where they sacrificed a king and his 300 citizen Spartiates plus a few thousand others to just stop the Persians.
All the way to having a Delphic oracle that said he had to die in order for Greece to be free. So I think there is a literary aspect to them all. I mean, the Battle of the Champions was that 546 BC. So again, was that even a real battle, or is it a literary device? It's a tricky one. I think you're right. I think there are both literary and real examples. But I think it does come down to, was it a deliberate choice by a group or a commander to die on the battlefield? Probably, Waterloo is the one where the grenadiers of the Imperial Guard are given the option of surrendering, and they turn it down in order to die. So that's the last stand, which again, that mirrors Chaeronea, where the Sacred Band, die to a man at Chaeronea, the Theban Sacred Band. So that seems to be a last stand. But there are other futile defenses by groups of soldiers who die to a man. Are they a last stand, or have we sort of glossed over them? At the Battle of Plataea, there were 300 Thebans fighting for the Persians, who get killed to a man by the Athenians. Is that technically a last stand? Yes, because they died to a man, but they're fighting.
Or is it just a revenge killing? You mean? Yeah.
Well, exactly. So, but it is a last stand, but it's not highlighted in that way. Horatius on the Bridge, is that a last stand?
Or are we copying something here? Is the Roman literary tradition copying something here?
Exactly. So I think there's all sorts of complications in it that make it great literature, and we still use last stands to this day. So I think there is a literary aspect to it. But I do think that there were probably some battles where these events occurred that, dying to a man in your unit, is Tudaborgo, Varus, the Varian disaster, is that a last stand? Because, well, they nearly all die.
Actually, quite a few seem to have made it back, but we're not talking about them.
No, and the same with
Cannae,
where the
Carrhae, but also Cannae.
Yeah, well, exactly.
Survivors of Cannae get sent to Sicily to redeem themselves, but they were supposed to be all dead. So what happened there?
Yes. Well, the survivors of Carrhae get sent to the eastern, edge of the Persian Empire. So,
and ever since we get a yearly news article that there's Chinese people in Western China who seem remarkably blonde, because we all know that ancient Romans are blonde.
Yes, and blue-eyed. But again, it's the way that the literary accounts of those battles tells us is that these are last stands, and they die to a man. But there's survivors in those cases, so they're not really last stands, are they? And what's the difference between a last stand and a massacre? Because surely on one hand it's a massacre, and on the other hand it's a last stand. So which aspect of it do you highlight? So it's a tricky one. Like after the battle, like is Adrianople, is that a last stand where the army essentially gets wiped out? We get a story after Adrianople of this is going to cover into one of the other questions we're answering in this set, where 300 men basically form into a wedge and then they disappear into the Goths and are never seen again, which just looks like a futile. Well, why did you do that? That was foolish. But technically, that's a last stand. They know they're going to die, and they give up all hope of surviving. And sure enough, that's what happens. So I suppose there are things on battlefields that look like last stands, but what we make into a last stand and what the ancient sources make into a last stand, I think, is a matter of careful selection and literary grooming, shall we call it, if we're being harsh.
No, I think that's what the question really is getting at, could be getting at anyway. Is a last stand a groomed version of a massacre? Is it just a way to is it a way to redeem something from a terrible military disaster, which is and some way to polish up a tarnished reputation, which is certainly an argument you could make for Thermopylae.
Absolutely, I think the history of the reception of Thermopylae has absolutely made it into a moral victory, whereas it was a military unnecessity. There was time for them to withdraw after they'd learned that their position had been compromised, and they choose not to for whatever reason. So you could even argue that it was a tactical mistake. And so this is very much a glossing and a sort of making Leonidas out to be, a better general than he was. But that reception of Thermopylae is peculiarly, in this the 2500th year, when you look at some of these other ones we've just mentioned, they don't get mentioned at all, because they're glossed over very, very quickly. They're not worth talking about, or they're not the victors, or the victors are a better subject matter, like the Sacred Band at Chaeronea. Because it's Philip and then Alexander, the focus moves on to them sooner.
Yeah, it's Alexander. Yeah.
So it's like we were saying before, it's a victory for Alexander rather than a massacre of the Thebans. So,
it's Victor's history again.
Yes. So in our fabulous answer, both.
Sorry,
and real. That there are some, but I think in each case you can probably make an assessment as to whether we're dealing with a real or a literary last stand.
Exactly. I guess that'll have to be it.